Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about understanding stimulus to fatigue ratios and giving you guys some examples of exercises that have a fairly high stimulus to fatigue ratio. Now, does this matter? Does this matter at all for people on lower volume training? Probably not. But anyone who's doing low volume training is either a novice, which is perfectly acceptable. And in fact, these exercises may not even be appropriate for a novice. In some cases, they may not be your best choice because you shouldn't be worried about stimulus to fatigue. You need to be worried about just getting as big and strong as possible your first 6 months. Okay, so you guys can ignore this and keep it as a data point for when you get more advanced. You guys need to follow the program. So I want to make that clear. I get guys a lot. Well, on this novice program, should I swap out the squats for the hip thrusts? That's the sort of stuff people will ask me after watching this. It's like, no, follow the program is what you need to do. Worry about this stuff when you're an early intermediate, which you will all be eventually if you train. But what we're looking for is for our hypertrophy exercises of how much muscle can we stimulate and grow with the least amount of fatigue that our body has to recover from. And that fatigue can be our whole body. It could be tendons, it could be joints, because that's something that people don't think about with a lot of this. How easy are they on joints and tendons? Okay, there's plenty of exercises that are very hard on your joints that are fairly low fatigue. Outside of that, there's a lot of small movements that are, or things like that. So you have to factor that in, right? Wide grip benching is very hard on your joints. You have to recover from that. So we get over to something like the hip thrust there, which you guys saw me doing. I only squat for max effort work these days. Now, when I was doing speed work, I was doing it then too. I don't squat for reps. I don't do any volume. I don't get that much quad stimulation and everything from my squatting because I only squat to a 1 rep max. There's some growth, but it's minimal. I build my quads and lower body with the hip thrust that you guys saw me doing at the start. Why? Because it works all the same muscles as squats do. Arguably, some of them more. We know it trains the glutes harder. We know it trains the glutes harder. That's not even subject to debate. It works the quads about as hard. Hamstrings, harder probably. It's a lower body builder. That exercise will build your erectors, your abs, your glutes, hamstrings, hips, quads. It's much easier to recover from than a squat. And it does a heck of a lot more than a leg press, easier to set up. I hate that when people say, is a leg press a replacement for a squat? Are you stupid? Leg press doesn't work your erectors or your back or anything. And it takes forever to load 1,000 pounds or 1,500 pounds of plates on and off the dang thing. And it can hurt your back. So you come over to something like a hip thrust. That's what I use to build my quads even. That's my main quad exercise, and people are always like, you got jacked quads from doing all those squats. Well, I don't really do that many squats anymore. My quads are still probably bigger. But it's easy to recover from. There's no axial loading. There's no axial loading. And it works the entire lower body, including the erectors, the quads, the hamstrings, the glutes, right? Works your entire lower body. I do a lot of volume on it. I do 5 by 10 all the time. When's the last time you were able to do 5 by 10 for limit sets on a squat? Or close to limit sets? Yeah, you really can't. Not for long. I do that one every lower body day and recover from it. Okay, matters. That's one of the reasons my squat and deadlift are so high. Next thing, you see me doing something like the glute ham raise up above. Arguably the best hamstring exercise ever. But it lets us train the hamstrings in a way that we're still doing a semi-multi-joint movement, moving our body through space. It's very easy on your joints, just in general. Okay, not that hard to recover from considering how hard it beats your hamstrings up. Again, you build massive, powerful hamstrings. The glute ham raise right now, one of the reasons I've been getting deadlift PRs. My sticking point on my deadlift is a hamstring weakness. It's helping me blast through that sticking point. All right. And you see you guys up here, incline bench with a football bar, using a slightly wider grip. All right, when we think in terms of stimulus to fatigue, what's going on here? That football bar changes your stimulus to fatigue. Why? Because it's easier on your shoulder joints. And I'm not saying you should be using the football bar for all pressing or anything. I use it for a heck of a lot of mine, though. Most of my pressing volume lately has been with the football bar. All right, if it's easier on our shoulder joints because of the rotation put there, how does that affect recovery? All right, you guys see me do floor presses with it also. Floor press is a very good stimulus to fatigue ratio relative to a lot of chest presses. But again, incline. Incline can be hard on your shoulder joints, especially if you try to go wider. This lets me do a slightly wider grip, so I can get a little deeper stretch in the chest. Because again, I use this as a supplemental lift for my overhead press and my bench to some extent. It's easy to recover from. Arguably, if we wanted to even talk about our overhead pressing volume, I do this first before my other overhead pressing so that I'm more fatigued. This will build your overhead press. Arguably, incline benching is one of the best front delt exercises. Obviously, a good upper chest exercise. We could argue how it compares to some other things on upper chest. Normally, again, the incline can be hard on shoulder joints. Start doing it with a football bar, though. We don't have to deal with the axial loading we get from the standing press, which I tend to do with just lighter weights for volume these days. We'll build your overhead press. All the same muscles are really being worked. It'll help build it. Helps build your shoulder girdle, whole upper pec, tricep. Football bar tends to give us a little more tricep involvement, particularly the medial head. But it makes it easier to recover from. It's easier on the shoulder joints. A lot of times I do this overhead press with my axle bar for really high reps afterwards. Why do I do really high reps? Well, it's easier as far as axial loading goes. I'm not putting much weight on my spine. And I'm building all the muscles of the overhead press. And people say, well, why do you care about the axial loading? You do so much heavy deadlifting. And stuff. That's why. I do max deadlifts and max squats every week. Low back recovery can become an issue. I do tons of standing rows every week. I spend a lot of time on my reverse hyper, just improving work capacity and restoration and strength of my low back. But again, we can put less stress on the low back by doing harder variations like using the axle bar. That's more difficult. It's more difficult. Forces us to use a few less pounds. Gets a little more tricep involved. Gets more forearm involved. But by doing something like this, in the case of an exercise like this, it does hit certain stabilizers or could put pressure on the low back. The really high reps help. But we can't do stuff like that with squats and deadlifts, can we? We can't recover. But a movement like this, of course, we can. And we can continue to train the exact muscles of the overhead press, our entire shoulder girdle. Right? We can get all the delts, the upper chest. We can get the upper traps with a lot of volume on something like this without beating our lower back up as much. And without beating our joints up as much. Sometimes even the overhead press can be hard on shoulder joints, depending on how much volume you do. Easier on them with some of these specialty bars. So a lot of times specialty bars exist for stimulus to fatigue. You may not have access to all these specialty bars, but you can think in these terms. You can think in these terms. But I think out of all of these, the one that should really hit home for most people is going to be stuff like that hip thrust. That's a perfect example of finding an exercise that can work every muscle involved in the squat, hypertrophy it that's easier to recover from. And the difference is that you do have a trunk component to it, unlike some leg machines and things. We're working our trunk and everything very hard, our erectors, our abs. They're being worked on that movement. And it has a superior stimulus to fatigue ratio to most lower body movements. But we have to think in these terms. We have to think in terms of back recovery from axial loading. We have to think in terms of shoulder joint, elbow joint, wrist joints, things like that. In terms of our recovery, it matters if we're doing our hypertrophy movements. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.